Welcome back to Homa Studio. This is our 5th video in the series of working with Flask and MySQL in PythonAnywhere. And we're still not going to work with Flask yet, but we are going to connect to a MySQL database using Python. So we're going to do that first and just make sure we can connect to our database. Then we're going to add on the Flask framework and have a front end to do that. So right now we're going to still be working in the console, but we will be connecting to our database that we worked with in the last video. So where I left off, I had a console running. This was the MySQL interpreter, and notice that it's not on anymore. It's not showing any of the information. That's why I copied it to a text file. When you want to get out of here, you could just type in quit and hit enter, and that should close it. When you're in the regular bash console, you would use exit, but you could use quit here. Now it's just going to say close. Now you could just close it up. So I'm just going to close this up for now. Now I have databases in here, a directory, a folder called databases, and in there I had some older stuff, and this is where I had my SQL file that we brought in. This was the one, the RMH, that we created our SpongeBob database with. So I'm just keeping database information or files in here. Now I'm going to go back and create one for Flask. Now even though we aren't going to use Flask yet, I'm going to make a Flask directory. So I'm going to just type Flask for now and just create new directory. And in here, I'm going to make a file called connect. Now I'm not going to call it main yet because we may use a main file, so I'm not going to waste using that name, and it's a little difficult changing the names when you use the web app. So I'm just going to call this connect.py, and we're going to use this to connect. So I'm going to make a Python file with the .py to connect to our database that we already have, the SpongeBob database. So I'm just going to click on new file. Now it'll open it up in the editor. Now we have nothing yet. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go to W3 Schools and get some code there because I don't have all this stuff memorized. So I like to go here and get the basic shell and then revise it. So I'm going to go into Python. This is a part of Python. And I'm going to scroll down all the way to the MySQL. And I'll just go right to getting started. And it talks about installing the MySQL driver. Now you may not have to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. They have a pip install for installing Python packages. That's what pip means, and you would do it through your bash console. So what I'm going to do is do that first. Even if I don't need it, it's not going to harm anything by doing it. Then we're going to import it into our Python file. But let's do this pip install. Now you don't have to do this whole thing here. I'm just going to highlight the part that says pip install the mysql-connector, and that's a driver that's going to actually help us connect to MySQL databases with Python. So we're going to do that first, having nothing to do with Flask. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go back to PythonAnywhere. Now I'm in a file right now. I'm not going to do anything in the file, but I'll go over here and I'll open up consoles. Now I don't have any consoles open, and I could close any that are open, but I'm going to go right into the bash console, not the MySQL, not any of the Python consoles. I'm just going to go right into bash, and this is just like going into your terminal on a Mac or PowerShell on Windows. And this is my home directory here, so I'm just going to paste that code. The pip install mysql-connector-python, and I'm just going to hit enter. Now I think this is okay, even though we're getting a message about deprecation. If you just want to be sure, you could do this. I'm going to hit my up arrow here, and then I'm going to backspace and go right in front of the P and put a 3 there and go back to the end, just in case. I think this is fine. I think this information here is saying that it's working, but just to be sure, I'm going to hit enter. And everything looks okay, saying requirement already satisfied. So I think I'm okay here. So I'm going to ignore that, even though that kind of freaked me out first. So I think we're okay with our install. So there's nothing else to do in bash right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my files, and I'm going to go back into Flask because that got closed up because I didn't open it in a new window, and I'm going to click on my connect.py. And there's my empty file, and I'm going to Python MySQL. Now I did this, and they have a test here. I'm just going to skip over the test. They have create database. Now we've already done that, we've already created a database because this code in here is basically just embedding SQL queries in here. Now we already have a database, so we don't have to check if it exists. What we want to do is we just want to make sure that we're showing it. So actually, I think this is the one here, but let's go down to select. We'll skip over insert, and this will just show everything. So here's some code here that we can use. And notice our Python code is going to import the mysql connector, then we're going to connect, then we're going to have a cursor object, then we're going to execute, and then we're going to use a fetch all method. Now I'll go over that, but let me just copy all this and then we'll revise it. So I'm going to copy this and go back here and just paste it in here. Now let's go through this line by line to see what we need to change. This is our import, just like you would import Turtle or anything else or any kind of random into Python. So we're going to import mysql connector. And they're using something called mydb. You could just call this con. I like to call it con, C-O-N-N, for connection. And that's basically going to use this connect method here. That's going to connect to our database. So I'll call it con. So anywhere where it had mydb, I'm just going to put con, just so I know that's the connection to the database. Not really the database, but the connection. And what I'm going to want in here is the localhost, the username, the password, and the database name. Now, we have all that. Now, I'm going to go over here and go to databases and open it in a new tab so I don't get out of here. So I'm going to right click, open this in a new tab, and just copy this stuff. So this is my host address, the full address here, and I'll put it inside the quotes. And notice there's commas after each variable here. And then I'll go back and copy my username, which is the same thing as your PythonAnywhere username. And notice as I'm working on this, it is not saved. That's why it says unsaved changes. That's why it has an asterisk up here. Once we're done, we'll hit save. And then your password. Now, I used my SQL root. I'm pretty sure I did. I could always change that, but I'm going to use MySQL root. Whatever you used for your password, if you used root, if you used MySQL admin, make sure you have the right one. Because if you have a problem, that's where it's going to be. And then for database, database name is, this is my database. So I'm going to just highlight this, just this part here. That's my SpongeBob database. And I'm going to copy that. And I'll put that in here. And again, this is the connection method that's connecting to our database. So we have a variable called con. And then what's going to happen next is we're going to make another kind of variable or instance here of the cursor object. Now, the cursor object is able to execute MySQL queries. You can see it's doing it here on this next line, but we first have to establish it, and we're giving it a special name here called myCursor. You could leave it myCursor. That's fine. You could call it whatever. So myCursor, and it's establishing that cursor object. Then that cursor object, now called myCursor, is going to use this execute method, and it's going to execute an SQL query. And the queries are going to be in quotes. And this says select all from customers. Now, do we have customers table? No, we have a characters table. So let's change that to characters. And then what we're going to have is a variable called myResult. This is going to be a result that we're going to actually be able to print out our rows from our database. And fetch all is a method that actually goes through and collects all the rows in the database that you have, or the rows in the table, I should say. So it's going to use this myCursor variable, and it's attached. So that knows that it's getting the connection and it's getting the query results, and we're holding it in something called myResult. You could do results if you want. It says myResult. I'll just put results and make sure this says results. If you don't want to use all that my stuff. And you could even say for row in here, or for rows instead of X, because that way it'll make a little more sense. So we're basically going through here, cursor object, the cursor's executing a query, and you could change these queries, and then the fetch all is basically returning the rows. Now, we could eventually put them in an HTML table, is what we're going to do in our subsequent videos. But for now, we're trying to take this slow one step at a time. I know people are eager to get into the Flask part, and we will, but we got to do this step by step. So we want to make sure we can connect first and that we can see our information. So that's what we're doing here. So I'm going to save. Now, this isn't going to show up on any front end yet. This is just going to run and show up in a Python interpreter. So it's just going to show up and it's going to show information there if it works. So we have it saved. Hopefully all our information is correct, and hopefully all of your information is correct, and hopefully you changed everything. So my cursor, con, and then results, and everything else is pretty standard in here. And what it's going to look like, if you go over here, if you just run example in W3 schools, this is what it does. It just prints out those rows. Now, that looks pretty nice. I don't know if they have line breaks in there or not, but that's working out okay. So that's what it should look like when we're done. So hopefully, if we know it's working, it'll look like that. So we don't need this. Let's go back here, and we're just going to run it. Now, I think you could use run either button here. I'm just going to hit run. And there it is. So that's showing our information from our database. We have all our rows that are in here, and it's running a loop here. It's Python loop for rows in results, and it's printing out the rows. So you could use X or whatever. So that's working. So that's our first step here in connecting to our database. And what we're going to do next is use Flask so that we could start creating web pages to display this. So we're going to make some HTML, but then we're going to have some Flask in there to do some templating work to do that. Flask is a little new to me, so some of the stuff I'm getting used to, but I know HTML and CSS and making a table and all that, so that's what we're going to do. So we're basically going to make an HTML file instead of just outputting here to the console. So that's our goal. So in our next video, we're going to start making a web app with Flask and then kind of modifying this code so it uses Flask to display everything on an HTML page. So if this works, you're in good shape. So we're going to move on, and I promise we're going to move on to Flask in our next video. So make sure you save this, make sure this is working. You could try other queries if you want there, but they should be fine. You could put in a query, where color is gray and all that kind of stuff. Remember, if you use quotes inside the double quotes, use single quotes when you do that. So we've already done that already, so that should be fine. So this was simple enough. Hopefully that everything worked and you didn't have any problem with the mysql-connector, and we'll be working with Flask in our next video. Thanks for watching.